This year's Humanities Day, we're excited to have all of you, and especially our panelists with us, as well as our alumni. My name is Katie Ramirez. I'm the Associate Director of Career Services, and I'm also one of the advisors that works with the Humanities majors exclusively, as well as employers that hire you. So today we're very excited again to have all of you here. On behalf of the Humanities Collective and the Center for Experiential Learning and Career Success, thank you for spending your Friday with us. I would hope that all of you choose to stick around after the panel. We will have the reception, we'll open those back doors, and we'll have food and drinks. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ruben Duper-Tweet, and he'll take it from there.
Hi, and let me say welcome again. We're going to move into our panel discussion. They are the reason you are here, but before we do, I just want to take a moment to recognize one of our great supporters for the Humanities Collective in this event in particular. And he's a busy man and might have to take off to some other meeting. So Herb, if I could get you to come forward for a second. So Herb Stumberg is the current chair of the Board of Trustees, and he has also been one of our great supporters, encouraging us, I think, to reach out to students, work with students, and he is the reason we started this program a couple of years ago with his nudge and his encouragement. And we wanted to say thank you. It's really appreciated, and because we are humanists, we bought a big book. Thank you. Okay, let's get right to it. The first thing we need to know, I think, is just have an introduction to our speakers. I'm not going to do that. They can do that better than I can. So let's just, what I'll do is have you go ahead and introduce yourselves, say who you are, maybe what you studied at Trinity and what you're doing now, and then we can get on to some of the other questions.
I'm Grant Ellis. I graduated from Trinity in 1997. I was a history major, and today I am the Natural Resources Manager for the City of San Antonio Parks and Recreation Department.
I'm Jake Eshelman. I graduated in 2011 with a degree in classical studies, where I studied hermeneutics, which is the interpretations of text, and reception theory, which is interpreting how other people interpret texts. I also had a lot of coursework in art and art history, and that will be relevant later. But yeah, currently I am a freelance photographer and creative director based in Houston, and I also own and operate my own skateboard company.
I'm Madeline Hazelwood. I graduated in 2011. I'm the Associate Registrar at Museum of the City of New York. I studied art history at Trinity, as well as medieval Renaissance studies and business administration.
I'm Chris Morris. I graduated in 1993. I was a classic studies major focused on art history and archaeology, and now I'm the director of the Los Angeles office of the National Trust for Historic Preservation.
Hi, I am Kate Rowley-Waters. I am a 2004 graduate. I graduated with majors in communication and history, and today I am essentially a project manager in the design department at USAA, which is a financial services, a banking, and an insurance company that's focused specifically on the military clientele. So I do work helping design teams understand what our customers want and then build the apps and the service and support experiences to meet those needs.
Great, thank you. I've got a series of questions that will keep us going if we need them, but we may not. We'll see how things play out. And what I'd like to do is get us started, ask a question. But if you all have questions at this point, you can jump in and ask them, and I can move us on to the next one, and we'll sort of play it by ear. But the first one is simply, are you in the career you expected when you were in college?
I can take that one. I would say that's a resounding no. When I was a student, I had this idea that I wanted to be a high-profile trial attorney. So everything I did was geared towards learning how to read and write and analyze and argue. And then close to graduation, I started realizing that perhaps that wasn't the most productive or positive route for me to go. And I ended up pulling back all of my law school applications and totally reimagining my future and what I wanted to do. So I was able to take a lot of the things that I learned here through coursework, through relationships that I had with students, through professors, and apply that towards a more creative career. No offense if anybody's going to law. But that was generally my sort of etch-a-sketch change of my future.
Can I piggyback on that?
Yeah, go for it.
I actually went to law school and realized in my third year of law school that I didn't want to be a lawyer either. And found myself in Washington, D.C. after graduation. To answer your question though, Ruben, I don't think I knew what my expectations were for my profession while I was in college. I don't think I had that set out in front of me at that point in time.
I guess kind of. I started as a business major, which was not for me. And really because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And then through the common curriculum art history classes, discovered that I really enjoyed it. And from there, just built on getting to my current position through internships and experience and finding out about a museum studies master's, and then so it was a very linear thing once I did finally pinpoint what it was that I wanted to do. So, but at first had no idea.
I also went to law school. No, no, I did take. I'm not doing what I thought I would be doing in college because I didn't even know that this was a job when I was in college. And I took a very circuitous path to get here. I did start down the road of academia, thinking classical studies major. What else are you going to do? No offense to the classical studies professors here, but that was sort of the path that I was on to the extent that I had a path. But then was also doing similar kinds of things, doing art history, doing archaeology, doing museum work, doing material culture studies, and sort of realized there's a whole nother subset of history and restoration in this thing called historic preservation, and that works on architecture and works on a much bigger scale. And so as I got into that, started out first in the for-profit world and ultimately got tired of only being able to do the projects where people could pay us enough, and then moved to the for-profit sector so that we could start doing the things that I really cared about.
Oh, I'm so far from where I thought I'd be. I thought I was going to move to New York City and be a magazine editor, and that was like what I wanted to do until about my senior year when I realized that I don't really care for New York City. So that threw a big wrench in things. And then thank goodness I didn't go that route with the way that print publication has gone. I think I graduated kind of right at a cusp where a lot of the media industry was changing. And so I realized that there were things that were more important to me and started on a career path that I hadn't even known existed when I was a student, first working in nonprofits, which was something that never even occurred to me that there was jobs and careers in that industry, and then have kind of taken it in a very non-linear direction since then.
Any questions? Does anybody want to ask a question of any of our panelists at this point? The trajectories folks have taken? We could move. Oh.
I'm Tim O'Sullivan, classical studies professor. Did not take offense. So I was wondering if now, in your careers, how often do you think back on sort of specific moments in college? I guess specifically I'll say in the classroom, in the academic realm. Obviously there's a big part of college that's non-academic as well, but I was wondering how often you make connections between what you do now and moments from your academic life in college.
All right, I'll take that one too. It's actually funny you bring that up because that's been something I've been thinking about a lot recently. Throughout my career path, I've tried different things, different industries, different positions and things of that sort. And it was only relatively recently that I discovered my real interest in not necessarily working in one medium or another, but really working through storytelling. For me, I find that very compelling. And what is this? What is 2018, 2019, 2018? Yeah, so 7 years after I graduated, I'm finding myself circling back to the core nugget of what I was interested in classical studies. And in terms of a specific moment, I remember being here as a prospective student and then last minute changing the course that I was going to sit in on, the mock course. And instead of going to something in sociology, I went to Erwin Cook's preview for Huma. and we talked about one specific section of one story, and I realized it just clicked for me that those are the kinds of discussions that I wanted to have throughout my career, and I wanted to do something that was tied in with that sort of that discourse. So that would, technically that's before I was a student, but I hope that counts. Yeah.
When I was a junior or senior, I was a history major, and I knew coming into Trinity that I wanted to be a history major. I had a great history teacher in high school who inspired me, and but there was a class that I took with Char Miller, who was a history professor here at the time, who's in Pomona in California now, I think, but he was a very well-beloved professor, and a lot of his former students still keep in touch with him, but he taught what may have been the first environmental history class Trinity offered at the time, and I took that class, and I'd had him for other stuff, but I took that class, and I had always had a leaning toward doing work in natural resources and doing work in with the natural world, but didn't really see a future in it in terms of professions. Didn't even at that point in time, but still remember elements of that class today that I can point to or draw from for my current job in the Parks Department. And I mean, I've actually talked to Char about that because it's really amazing stuff.
I don't think I can point to like this class in attic black figure painting that changed my life, but what I can say is that my interest in history and culture and archaeology and art and architecture is clearly carried through. And if anything, all of the work that I did in classical studies, I mean, it was 25 years ago, so no, I don't think about it every day, but it is something, it did sort of change the way that I looked at the impact of history and culture and gender on the world around me, and helped me think about the way that I understand our culture and material culture. So those things still very much carry through. And if I had to point to one thing that probably really affected me more than anything else, it was the opportunity to go to North Africa and do archaeological digs. Like that changed everything for me. So
I think I'm a little bit in the opposite. I have no doubt that my time at Trinity was incredibly substantial in teaching me thinking skills and giving me like a broader ability to be thoughtful and articulate. But I have to say I can't hardly think of a particular piece from a particular class that comes up regularly or is directly relevant to my work in the business world, which isn't to say that it wasn't relevant to who I've become, but the translation for me and the roles that I've taken isn't there's not a clear string connection from a course to what I do today.
I mean, for myself, studying art history, what I do now is not necessarily interpreting the works that we're presenting, but taking care of them. So I think having the background in art history and knowing what I am handling and the importance of it to overall history plays into my job every single day. So.
To add on to this question, it feels like an extension, but can you name 2 or 3 skills that you gained in your time at Trinity? It doesn't have to be a moment in class, but just thinking about skills more broadly that I think has sort of come up already, but maybe to push on that a little bit.
I'll jump on that one. I think the critical thinking skill of being able to hear and see different pieces of information and then draw connections between them and kind of build those connections and think through them is is a skill that I learned at Trinity through the course curriculum. And especially I'm thinking about my history degree, where you might be looking at things that happened in one piece of history and things that happened later, different regions, and how that pulls together. That has been very translatable into the business world, where you do have lots of different restrictions, demands, customer bases, and you need to be able to take a step back, understand each one independently, and then be able to build that bigger picture of how it all fits together, so you can build a strategy and business case and action plans to meet that. And so those skills that I did develop through the liberal arts and the humanities studies have given me that thinking power that I've been able to take into the business world.
I would agree with that, and I don't know that I've got specific, sort of classes that I can point to that help me put things together, as much as I did have relationships with specific instructors, like people who really pushed me, who challenged me, who gave me the confidence in my own skills that I could do things that I didn't believe that I could do or that I didn't even know that I could do. And so being really willing, when you find those people, and they are definitely here, and some of them are still here from 25 years ago, which is fantastic, really lean into that. I mean, I got so much out of those relationships both as an academic and as the professional that I ultimately became.
I think general project management, being able to handle large projects at one time, and just time management, as well as with the liberal arts degree, you are, because of the common curriculum, you have to take classes within different subjects. And so I still will go back to some of the chemistry classes that I have to take in just researching basic conservation of artwork, or determining the amount of silica to go into a case when, like, I don't really know how to do math anymore, but so
Just the any of us do.
yeah. I know. So you do have to kind of draw back on some of those classes that you took years ago, but having done that, it is very helpful. So
Stay with me on this one. I think the most important skill that I learned while I was here was paper making. And it sounds super random, but what was amazing to me about that process is that was the first time in my life where I can remember having an entire process that started from absolute raw materials, and then you transform those through certain processes into a final finished product. But at the end of the day, it wasn't just that about taking a tree and making it into paper. It was also the broader implications of that and the broader opportunities. So as part of that process, we were encouraged to also make our own tools to enable that to happen. And there was something that was super empowering about that idea of knowing that you can make the tools that you need in order to accomplish a task. And that is something that, even on just an abstract level, I've taken through in my career and in my personal and professional practices.
Well, I will echo the importance of the critical thinking component that the interdisciplinary studies will provide, that the humanitarian studies will provide you all. I think that's just, it has served us all very well in our careers. But also what I took from Trinity was an ability to write. And part of that was being a history major and the fact that we wrote a lot. But the ability to write will serve you well as you move forward in many different capacities. It will be noticeable when you get older and you deal with people who cannot write at all, and you will realize the value of that essay or that report that you wrote over and over in college at some point in time, because you will deal with a lot of people who are lousy writers.
It's a brave new world out there.
and just in basic correspondence as well.
Exactly.
I mean, just not necessarily that you're writing a similar academic paper, but just having a clear, concise way of communicating.
Right.
The ability to form ideas and speak in sentences. It's overlooked, but it's very important.
And that's not to suggest those accountants are not smart people.
Accountants are.
Yeah.
above and beyond.
Bad day for lawyers and accountants.
Yeah, Anna.
Hi, I'm Hannah Braley. I'm a senior religious studies major here. And I was just wondering what advice or what you would say to students and soon-to-be graduates that are trying to walk the fine line between finding a career or a path that contains something that they're really passionate about and agrees with their core values, and also something that is stable and a little bit more functional, especially since humanities majors don't usually have a very direct path to follow. It's not really laid out for us. So maybe something about your journey or any advice that you would have for those.
I definitely have thoughts on this one. So, like I said, I thought I was going to move to New York, be a magazine editor, didn't like New York. I was supposed to go on I was supposed to be the photographer on an archaeological dig right after I graduated, and the permits got pulled right before. So I hadn't planned on a job. So I ended up in this job situation where I started working at Starbucks because I needed health insurance. And then wanted to get back to San Antonio because my now husband already lived down here. So there were like other life events that started pulling me beyond what I thought was going to be like my professional ambition. So I, started kind of trying to meet those needs. Needed a job, found one at the San Antonio Zoo, which is a nonprofit, in their membership and events department. Which again, nonprofits, it never once occurred to me that my communication skills could be translatable into an area there. Started working in nonprofits. I ended up back at the university doing development and fundraising before I moved over to a technology company where I was doing internal communication. Moved over to Whataburger where I was doing internal communication, and now I'm at USAA working in their insurance side of the house, car insurance. And it took me more than a decade to kind of see the pattern in this, but what I have figured out, what I truly love to do is build communities and organize things. And so I have, and that as nerdy as it sounds like, gets me really excited. So being able to start to connect people, to make processes run more effectively, to help get output moving to like the end user where it's supposed to be, really important to me. And I can do that whether I'm at a hamburger company or a bank or a nonprofit. So it took some trial and error, and it took some like kind of gritting my teeth and taking some positions and roles that I wasn't sure if they were quite right to find that pattern. But now that I know that that's there, I'm able to really sort of cultivate where I go, what I do, like what I look for in a job and a role to meet that core need for me. Different people will be different in like how flexible they are in the kind of industry they work in. But I would encourage you to kind of think through that, and you can look to your extracurricular experiences, you can look to like your personal hobbies and passions, as well as your academic and your work in your professional experience to like see if you can find patterns, but make sure you really kind of think about yourself as a whole. It's not just your academic self that like puts you on your professional trajectory.
I agree. I mean, I didn't obviously take the same path. I ended up going to school in 2 more places after this, so it took me a while to kind of figure out exactly what I wanted to do, and I think more importantly what I didn't want to do. And one of the things that I think I found was that there was never going to be the perfect job. Like you can sort of try to define for yourself, this is my dream job. This is what I would love to do. I don't know that that's out there. There may be a few lucky people out there who find it or stumble across it or create it. But in my experience, what I found was that I needed to find a job that combined enough of the things that I enjoyed doing, that I found personally gratifying, professionally gratifying, and most importantly, allowed me the opportunity to learn and grow in that position. And then I would stay there sometimes a couple of years. I've been in this job for 15 years, which I cannot believe I just uttered those words, but I have been because this job constantly allows me to change and grow and try new things, and I have shaped it into what I wanted to do. Like if I looked at the job description that I was initially hired for, I don't do any of that stuff anymore, but I do the things that I really love doing and that I'm really good at now.
I know, especially for the field that I am in, it's a constant question of, do I go for something that is more stable and is financially as well, or do I go for something that I am passionate about? Because it is a very difficult job market to get into, and you are never going to see the financial compensation of someone within like the financial sector or like a lawyer or accountant or that kind of field. But I love everyone that I work with, and I love seeing the end result of what we create. And also having visitors come to the museum and say, oh, I learned so much about, this subject that I had no idea, like this happened in New York. And so being able to contribute to people's overall knowledge is, I think the positive for me. And so, and I know that there's always a question of, well, I'm getting into this field, I'm not going to get paid very much. I have to go to grad school to get my master's, and like, how do I deal with student loans? There is a thing called public service loan forgiveness. And I'm currently going through this process, so I want to tell you there are options. So don't let that scare you. There are grants and scholarships, and just really explore all of your options. And yeah.
In your question, it's interesting to me because there seems to be a tension between passion and practicality, right? And in my response, I want to focus on the idea of practicality. So let's say you go and you pursue a job that is stable, that pays you well, but you're miserable and you hate it. You're not going to last in that job. You're not going to last in that industry. It's not going to be fulfilling. So at the end of the day, is it all that practical? So I would definitely build on what was said before, that you have a lot more power than you think you do to create your own opportunities, to build your own jobs, to structure them, or to get one and evolve it to your liking and to your capabilities. So I would challenge you to approach it in that realm rather than looking at it as a trade-off or a sort of duality between what can pay the bills and what will make you happy. Because ultimately, if you go for paying the bills and you're not happy, you won't last in that anyway. So it's really a waste of time.
Sometimes it's a long game too.
Yeah.
What he's saying. So
For sure.
you may sometimes make a decision to take a job or do something with your life that isn't meeting your passions as part of a long game to get to where you want to go. And you'll know your threshold for like what you can take and what you can't. But don't ever forget that like sometimes you do need a stepping stone to move you to what will be like fulfilling your passion eventually.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just got to do grit your teeth and do the data entry job.
Yes.
Get it on your resume.
It's very true.
What I'd like to do is actually repeat Hannah's question, but reframe it a little bit. One of the things that we know is that students who graduate with liberal arts degrees and humanities degrees end up doing really well in their careers in the long run, right? On lots of metrics, financial, et cetera, they do well in their careers. But the hurdle is often that first job, just because of some of the public discourse on what you made the clear lines between a major and career. So I wonder if you have advice for the students on marketing the skills, or talking about what they can do. Are there things that you wish you had known in those first conversations you had trying to get a job, in those first steps, that we can give our students some specific advice?
Well, I can start off. I mean, I think that, being comfortable, being casual, being yourself when you go into, if you're not comfortable or casual, just don't worry about that. But be yourself when you go into these interviews. I mean, obviously, getting your foot in the door is going to depend on how your resume is appears, and whether or not you have a skill set based on your college experience that will at least get you the interview. But once you've got the interview, I think it's just a matter of being yourself. People who interview you will they will recognize a sense of confidence in you as a potential employee if you are able to be yourself. And obviously there are there is a level of nerves and inhibitions that will factor into it. But if you're able to go in and be comfortable and in your own skin, then you will be able to promote yourself a little bit better. I know that sounds rather basic, but it's very true. I think I have been fortunate. I've always been able to interview well in jobs. I have been turned down for jobs sometimes, but I've always interviewed well. So I don't get too nervous before going into an interview, and I always walk out feeling that I've handled myself, very professionally and calmly. But I think that's important to take into those future job interviews.
Given that y'all are students, or at least most people in here, my answer to this would really stem around the psychological phenomenon called the preference for potential. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but essentially what it states is that as people, when we assess another person or another opportunity, we are less enticed or impressed by someone who has already accomplished a lot of things, and we tend to be more excited and impressed by someone who has the potential to accomplish all these great new things. So given that you're students, You, I'm sure, have a lot of accomplishments, but more than that, more than your academic record, more than your skills, you have a lot to offer, and you have a lot of potential. So what I would do is, as you're assessing opportunities, when you speak with the people who are, I guess, the gatekeepers of those opportunities, talk about what you can bring and what your vision is for that opportunity, what unique skill sets and what unique perspectives you can contribute to that so that you can help them in that endeavor. It seems like a much more active place to be, and I think that people tend to respond to that.
If I can just offer something that I think is complementary to what you're saying and also potentially deviates from it slightly. I firmly believe that what you gain in the humanities, in your humanities work, is that critical thinking skill, but it's very unlikely you're going to be able to walk into an interview and just sort of like, I'm a critical thinker. Like, are you now? In addition to showing your potential, I think there's something you need to do. You need to have a bank of examples of application of critical thinking skills. And I'd encourage you now to just go ahead and start yourself like a Google Doc or a little bulleted list. These can come from all sorts of work that you have done. So I think it was you were mentioning like project management skills. If you've done something with an extracurricular organization or sorority or fraternity or a big project or an internship, being able to relay and kind of show how you use your critical thinking skills to get something done, to move through a project management exercise, start coming up with some just like a list that you always have in your pocket so you can take that into an interview and be able to articulate how you've exercised your critical thinking skills, which I think will kind of go into that potential, will showcase how much more potential you have to accelerate that in a particular industry or role or experience.
You said something there. The thing that I found that was incredibly helpful to me, and I know it's really tough to do, it's one of those stepping stone things. I did a lot of unpaid internships or very lightly paid internships where it was just enough to kind of make it worth my while. But for me, it was really valuable from a practical standpoint, but also from a sort of professional standpoint, in that it allowed me to kind of sample those places to understand, is this really something that I want to do on a professional level? Could I see myself doing this 5 days a week for the next 5 years? But it was also really, really useful for me to understand those places and how they functioned and who was there. Like, who would I be working with? What is this industry like? Who are the decision makers? How do the projects work? How are the money decisions made? And that's going to be helpful to you no matter what you end up doing, whether you're in the nonprofit sector, in the public sector, in the private sector. That's what you kind of need to learn no matter what. And so having that kind of real world experience and understanding those and making those connections early on, I mean, it's a mild investment on your part, but I feel like you get so much more return on those kinds of internship opportunities. And then if you end up loving it, then you've got professional connections there that you can use and hopefully turn that into something else.
Just to add to that really quick, I mean, I think all of that is very, very true and very, very helpful. I would also take into whatever circumstance you find yourself in a willingness to learn, because we all know a lot, and we all graduate from Trinity thinking we know a lot, and on some levels we do, but on a lot of other levels, there is a lot for us to learn, and so walking into that interview and conveying a willingness to learn more to that potential or future employer is going to say a lot to them, about you, and will only benefit you as well.
I just had a short comment on basic interviewing, kind of. Treat it the same as you would a class. Show up on time, be prepared, and also remember that the person interviewing you is probably just as nervous as you are. I mean, it's not an easy process to interview someone.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind as well, that it's an exchange, it's a conversation. It's not just, it doesn't have to be as formal as it's always made out to be.
Yeah, they're full of it too. I mean that. Yeah.
I wanted to build on something that Kate, Grant, and Jake both mentioned. You've changed, your career's changed, and your job changed. So how did you convince Whataburger that you had the skills to do what they wanted you to do when you'd been at the zoo, for example? How did you reinvent yourself, do the research, so to speak, for that job?
That's a great question. Let's think here. I think it goes back to having the ability to kind of, you're using your critical thinking skills to take a look at some of the problems that you solved or the projects that you've worked and extract from it what you know is universal, or even better, what you know is of great importance and relevance to where you're going. So you're gonna have to do some research to figure that out. You're gonna have to do some like introspection and some connect the dots of your own work. But being able to, for example, understand an audience, like really understand a client and what they need and want, and what you need to do if you're going to deliver them communication that's meaningful to them or products that are meaningful to them. That's a translatable skill. And so you need to be able to articulate what you did in one area and what was successful, but take it up that notch then and make it very overt for who you're interviewing with, how you can do that same thing for them for the problems that they have. So you have to be a good listener. You need to do some research ahead of time to hypothesize the kinds of problems, the problem states that you might be working in when you're interviewing, but you also want to go in and ask some meaningful questions to be a good listener, and then connect those dots for them so that you're speaking to the problems that they have and that you're just clearly articulating. You're not saying, I've done this. You just say, I've done this and this was the impact, and from what I've heard you say, this is something that you need, and to that potential piece, here's some ideas, or here's an approach that I might take to solve it. So you're piecing it all together for them so that they don't have to piece it together themselves.
In my experience, what has enabled me to kind of try out different avenues and different industries was the skateboard company. So in short, I essentially launched a business in order to get into the creative industry. And when I was interviewing, I was able to point to the skateboard company and everything that I was able to accomplish through that, the thought that went into it, the results of all that thought. And that was an immediate, I think, not just a novelty, because you don't see someone building a portfolio out of launching a business, but it was interesting for the interviewer to see that I took the leap of faith to do that work, but also that I could speak about that work in a way that was meaningful and established me less as a sort of employee that I could work for somebody, and more of a partner, as this is what I can bring to this opportunity. Does that make sense? So that would probably be my answer to that.
I've had a very random series of professional exercises that have led me down this path, and so quickly I graduated from Trinity. I moved to Washington, D.C. I lived there for 2 years. I waited tables and I worked in museums, and then I decided to go back to law school. So I went to law school. I graduated from law school realizing that I did not want to practice law. I moved back to Washington, D.C. I got a job working in the affordable housing industry on the nonprofit side, basically doing legislative work and research. That eventually evolved into a position doing legislative work for a wildlife conservation organization, where I really began to find my passion. And then moved back to San Antonio, worked in the conservation world here, found myself in the city doing land conservation work for an aquifer protection program that is managed by the city of San Antonio, and then eventually into the Parks Department, where I feel like I've really found a home. And so it was a very, as disjointed as it may seem, it was a very, for me, organic process, because at each stop along the way, I learned new things, I learned new skills, I was able to take from those experiences very valuable lessons. I learned what kind of employee I could be. I learned what kind of boss I didn't want to be. I learned a lot from each of those stops. So I would never have been able to predict 20 years ago, right after I graduated, that I would have done this. I mean, but, and many of you will find yourselves in similar spots, I think, in 20 years. But it's a process, and you will learn a lot along the way about yourself, about the kinds of things you want to be in life, and it's It's a fun journey.
Mhm.
Enjoy it.
Yeah, I think just one more note on that. I was just going to say, I think there's a lot to staying open to opportunities and listening, because a lot of times the opportunities that have bubbled up for me are things that I didn't necessarily want to acknowledge. But if you really act with intention and in being true to what you value, those things will find their way to you, and you just have to listen and pursue those when they arise.
Do you have any questions? I've got a couple more we can head us into, but I wanted to make sure that do we have students who have questions at this point on some of what we've been talking about? All right, this might be a quick response, but I'm curious. Has anyone in the work world ever questioned your choice of major?
For me, no. It's listed in almost every job description that it's a requirement, so it's never been a problem. Yeah.
Curious.
I can tell you, I don't think anybody cares what my major is anymore at this point. It might matter for your first job or two, but it quickly becomes much less relevant than your work experience.
Now, I've never had anybody question it. I mean, at this point, it's so long ago that most people are shocked and kind of pleasantly surprised. Like, wait, you studied classical studies and archaeology? I had no idea. Like, that's usually what I get. So.
What sorts of experiences should current humanities students be seeking out? If we think about like what helped you down the road. Some of you have mentioned extracurricular. I think some of those things, some of the things that were extracurricular, we sometimes do a bit more in class, like undergraduate research and that sort of thing now, or maybe we always did, we just call it something else now. What sorts of experiences should our students be seeking out right now to get ready for what's next?
Ones that make you uncomfortable. I'm absolutely serious. For me, that manifested in public speaking. And that ended up being one of the courses that I think back to most often in terms of giving me the skills that I needed to interview, for example, or get up in front of a room and talk to people. I think that there is a lot to be said for putting yourself in places of vulnerability and seeing how you handle that. And that could be in any number of ways. That could be volunteering outside of coursework. That could be in taking a course like math that none of us in this room are really super stoked about. There are all sorts of different ways, but I think that putting yourself in the place where you have to grow and you can understand and acknowledge what that tension is like, I think that's really, really important.
I think that there's a strong value in supplementing your humanities education with a little bit of business and practical coursework. And I was telling Ruben earlier, I'm going to give you advice that my mother gave me when I was in school, and I ignored her advice and regretted it later, so I'll give it to you and you can ignore it, and then in about 15 years realize it was right. Take some basic business courses, maybe take some basic courses that even you out. So understanding a little bit of marketing, a little bit of accounting and financial stuff is super relevant, because no matter what you go into, no matter what humanities passion you have, in the real world it's going to come in conjunction with some of this other practical, like, life stuff, work stuff. So take the opportunity now to balance yourself out, and as you start to move into the work world, take on projects that may make you a little bit uncomfortable. Take on volunteer experiences that might be a little bit out of your comfort zone to gain those skills and experience.
Yeah, I agree with both of those things, like 110%. Absolutely, particularly having some business sense of just how the business world works is absolutely critical, no matter what you do, whether you work for a nonprofit or anything else. But the idea of putting yourself in uncomfortable positions is absolutely right. And I have found, I would say also look for situations that involve a little bit of risk. Not a lot of risk, but where you are pushing yourself to make strategic and smart decisions. And that will, I think, also help you in your ability to kind of present yourself and your skills to show that you are making informed choices, and there may be a 30% chance of success in doing this, but I want to try something different. I don't want to do the safe thing. I don't want to do the reliable thing. I want to do something that makes me a little uncomfortable and pushes the boundaries. And I think you are going to be rewarded much more frequently for showing that you're willing to push the boundaries than you are by just staying with the safe choice or doing nothing.
Right. And I think for a lot of college students, that manifests as an internship or a job while they're still in school, but it can be other things. When I was a junior and senior, my junior and senior year of Trinity, I coached an under 10 boys soccer team in the Alamo Heights Fort Sam Houston Soccer League. And if you want challenging, go manage a bunch of little kids, especially when you're a college student and you have no idea what that's about. It was great. It was a very rewarding experience, but it was challenging, and it pushed. I also suddenly had to find I was getting up early on Saturday mornings. That was unusual. So there are ways to explore these opportunities that are not just your standard 9-to-5 internship with whoever.
Yeah. I mean, I would second as many internships as possible. That's really where I learned every basic hands-on skill that I have now. Like, my master's was the very history and theory of museums, but in terms of like the practical knowledge of how to install an exhibit, I learned through my internships. And so I know that a lot of them are unpaid, and so kind of also going into it knowing that you were going to have to have a separate job on the side. That it's, and to go back, and to go back, that it's not a quick process. It does take a while to get to a point where you want to be. When I was in grad school, I worked 7 days a week for 2 years. So it's kind of pushing yourself beyond what you think you can do, because you will get there. Because you've already gone through Trinity, which is a difficult school in itself. So knowing that you can do that.
It will help you with your time management skills as you get older as well.
Yes.
I mean, which, as you get older and as your work begins to consume you and the rest of your life begins to consume you, you will realize that, being able to juggle many different things in life is critical to the success of any of them. And learning that early on is going to be helpful.
Any questions at this point? My goal for myself was to just shut up and get out of the way and let them talk. I do want to say one thing. I do know at some point it's going to happen. But I think this is something that has happened at Trinity since you all graduated. That over the last few years, listening to alums and thinking about the importance of internships, we've put a lot more energy into thinking about internships across a range of disciplines, and also for humanities students in particular. And one of the programs that is relatively new in one of our signature programs is the ALE program, the Arts, Letters, and Enterprise, that precisely does the kind of business, some of the business minor or a set of courses for arts and humanities students. That was the initial impulse. That has now it's connected to a fantastic set of internships that are similar to the undergraduate research program in the summer, but you stay here in town and you're working in a number of different venues, public, private, nonprofit. So I just had to put in a plug for one of the great programs. If you haven't heard of it, we can help connect you to that. It's something that we started to do precisely because folks like you told us this was a need. So.
And I can only imagine that the internship opportunities that are available to you guys today are much more plentiful than what was available to some of us when we were. I mean, when I was in college, the internet was new, and so I mean, email. I think I started emailing as a senior at Trinity, and so it was all sort of undiscovered country, and so you really had to go knock on doors and kind of find out where internships were back in the day. Today, it's a lot easier for you guys. I think you're able to go out and learn where those opportunities exist much easier.
And there's going to be companies like USA that have invested quite a bit in their internship programs too. So connecting through the university to understand how to connect into these internship programs is a huge asset to you. USA has an elaborate internship program. They have employees dedicated exclusively to organizing and managing a meaningful internship program where they pay their interns quite generously and where you get experience that you're going to put in a portfolio. And again, you have to kind of work for an insurance company, which I understand as a student, you're like, maybe that's pretty boring. But once you're like, once you kind of like get into it and you see that the work and the skills that you have and the passions that you have can be applicable in other places, and the experience that you get, even if you end up going into something different, is really invaluable. And the resources are there for you. You just need to take advantage of them to just kind of like get in the machine, and it will basically do the rest for you.
We're rounding the final turn here. We've got about 8 minutes to go. So I'm going to ask a question, but I want you all to be thinking about that question for the students that you've been wanting to ask, and you were waiting for the right moment. And I want to tell you that in the next 8 minutes is your moment. So we'll do a quick round of responding to this question. What is the one thing you wish you knew as a student transitioning into work? So what you wish you had known. Some of it I think has already come up in some ways, but if you want to go back to either repeat it or add something to that.
I wish I had known to cherish the naps that I was able to take at Trinity. That's all I got. Yep.
I do have something, and this isn't the same for everyone, but something that I did not understand as a student. I believed that when you graduated and moved into the professional world, that your career was kind of the pinnacle of what you were aspiring to, and that your professional role was who you were. And it's taken me a while, but I've realized that it's different for different people. There's not like a hierarchy necessarily of like what makes you like a successful person. It's more, what direction is this? It's more like parallel. Okay, I don't know what I'm saying, but whatever. It's not up and down where there's like not so good and like really awesome. If you're the kind of person who like puts everything in your car and like drives to New York on your own and just like guts through it to become a CEO, that's not the best. It's actually more of a plane like this, and it may be that you find over time, while your career is important to you and your professional life is important to you, maybe there's other things, family or personal connection or volunteer work or hobbies and passions, and you learn how to invest your energy where is truly fulfilling to you, and the only outlet doesn't have to be your career. So while you still need to support yourself, and you should hopefully find something that's meaningful to you and uses your skills, it took me a while to take that vision that it was like this, and I had to just move up and like turn it over and realize that I could sit in a different place and be happy and be true to myself.
I'd say the one thing that I wish I had known, and I don't think I got this from any of the schools or any of the courses or any of the professors that I ever had, was how much my professional success wasn't necessarily going to be dependent on me and what I know how to do and what I can accomplish, but how much my success is dependent upon the people that I work with and the relationships that I build and what we're able to do together. I don't have a single project that I manage or any work that I do that doesn't involve at least a few other, if not dozens of other people and organizations and government agencies and everything else. And my ability to succeed is dependent in large part on my ability to show them that we have a common goal and that we are working together in a way that's going to help us both reach that goal. And I wish I had known that, because it makes you focus much more on what you're able to do outside of yourself. And I think that's something that will help you if you kind of carry that through in the way that you approach a lot of your work and a lot of your work relationships.
I think that, it would have been nice to know that no matter where you go and no matter what you end up doing, you are eventually going to work with and encounter some generally very rotten people. It's everywhere, and you just need to be strong and learn that dealing with that person on a day-to-day basis now, while it may seem miserable, it is not the end of the world, and you will eventually get past that.
Questions? This is your moment.
I'm going to make a comment. My answer is that all jobs end. When I grew up, my parents had regular jobs, and it was sort of a steady state. And what I found, in my career may be a little bit unusual, is that every single job is a gig, and you have to work for that next gig, and you need to sort of figure out what's going to be coming up the pipe. So you can't get. I mean, it depends, on the type of profession, but there are some professions that you just can't count on staying there for any length of time. You just have to be ready to go on to the next gig.
There was a question here.
Hi, I'm Natalie. I'm an art history major. I just wanted to ask, how did you all decide what your next step in terms of where you go physically was after graduation? You talked about moving to DC, and then you talked about not liking New York. So, just any advice on that?
I mean, for me, I was applying. I finished a semester early, and I was applying to jobs at the same time as applying to grad school, and was really finding that a lot of the jobs I was applying to were asking for like 3 to 4 years of experience or a master's degree. And I was like, well, I can't get the 3 to 4 years of experience without doing an internship, which is not paid, which is not where I want to do. So eventually decided to go and do my master's. And how I ended up in New York was that my college roommate was like, I'll move with you. So that's kind of how that decision was made. But it was just kind of, I found that a lot of the things that I wanted to do were asking for a higher education degree. And so that's how I ended up there.
I went to grad school 2 times after this, but I made those decisions about where I went based upon where I thought I wanted to work and the kind of work that I wanted to do. So that was a part of it. Like I went to, my final grad school was in Chicago because I knew I wanted to work in Chicago for the kind of work that I was doing at the time for preservation. But in terms of where I am now, I mean, like I said, I've been at the same organization for a long time, but I was in Chicago. I did get the job in Chicago, and I worked in our Chicago office for 10 years. And then the opportunity came up for me to go to Los Angeles, and I could have stayed in Chicago and I could have continued my career there. But I think, as like everybody has said here, looking for those opportunities to move or to jump in a way that's going to allow you to grow and have a different sphere of influence is absolutely critical. I'm really glad that I did that. Although if you would have asked me 10 years ago, would I be in Los Angeles, I would have had no idea.
So we've hit the time, and I want to honor that. And I want to say we're going to thank our panelists here in a second. But I want to say that the other really important piece of Humanities Day, and by the way, I meant to say this earlier, every day is Humanities Day. The other really important piece of Humanities Day is the reception that follows, which is an opportunity to speak with the panelists one-on-one, with other alums who are here. We also have faculty from Humanities and Religion and several other departments who will be here, and I think some other alums are dropping in on us as well. So this is, I want to make sure that you're aware of that next step. And I'll hand it off to my colleague.
I'm going to hand it off to Twyla in just a second, who's going to kick off the reception for us. Twyla's the head of Career Services. But before we do that, I just wanted to thank a few people. Thank you again to Herb Sumberg for your support of this event. Katie and Lady Stacy in the Career Services office. This has been their labor of love, and they've done an incredible job. So we're really grateful to them. And of course, thanks especially to these amazing panelists. This has been such a great conversation. So can you join me in thanking them?
Thank you.
Awesome.
wonderful turnout. Thank you all for your interest in being proactive and learning what the transition looks like and learning how people who have gone there before can kind of pour into you regarding what you can expect and what sort of things can better prepare you than perhaps they might have been prepared when they wandered into the different first destinations that they went into. One of the things that was mentioned earlier was about articulating your skills and being able to have a bank of those critical skills and knowing how to communicate that in a way that makes you a competitive candidate for the types of jobs that you're applying for. I want to reiterate that, and I also want to make a plug, because that's what I do in career services. I try to get you to come in so we can get you better prepared for the job search. Next Wednesday, we will be doing our Interview for Success program. One of the things that we talked about is how Trinity students have a really rich experience. I see it on your resumes. Sometimes I don't see it on your resume. We have a conversation and then I see it on your resume. But sometimes you sell yourself short because you don't really know what people are interested in knowing about you. And so now we're getting to the place where we're helping you put it on your resume, we're helping you think about it, be strategic and proactive, but we want to help you articulate it. So those of you who haven't had the opportunity to practice your interview skills, your storytelling abilities, please come out next Wednesday. It'll be right across the bridge in the Coach Student Center, Suite 215 in our office. We will be doing mock interviews. You'll have the opportunity to share your story, talk about your skills, and get feedback from individuals who can help you understand whether or not you're doing that competitively, or whether there's other ways you can demonstrate those skills that employers are looking at. In addition to that, we also have a resource online through Handshake, another plug, that allows you to be able to record your mock interviews, yes. So you can talk about what industry that you want to go into. You can choose a set of questions based on that industry. Those questions will be asked by a pre-recorded actor, and you'll be able to answer those questions and then look at it and see if you have any nervous tendencies, whether your voice goes hear what you're saying, so that you can see if you're presenting yourself well. And that resource is available 24/7 through the Handshake database that we have available to all of you. So there's resources that you can use. In addition to that, please make sure you come in and see us if you have questions about internships, if you have questions about the job search, if you have questions about how your major can translate into a career of interest in the Coates the Coates Student Center. Again, Handshake is a resource that you can actually schedule appointments with your advisors through. And Lady Stacy in the back, if you wave your hand, and Katie. Katie's in the hall. She's the one who came up here and just gave out the gifts as well. Those two are the ones that primarily serve students who are in the arts and humanities. So please be sure to make them your best friend until you get to that point of getting that first job or that internship. If you have any questions, we'll be floating around. You can ask us. Again, thank you so much, panelists, for coming out, flying in, driving in, walking in, to be able to show the students that you really value being able to help them prepare. There are so many other alumni like them who want to help you with your transition, and we can also connect you with those individuals. Thank you again.
Thank you.